checking the attendance for now. Whether do we constitute the quorum? Can you hear me?
Yes, Chair, we can hear you. There's Mr. Zungula who just logged in, Chair.
Oh, yes, yeah. Okay. You can see where I am. I had to take a trip. Let me welcome everyone present, the honorable members, the minister, and the delegation of the department, as well as the support staff and all those that are present in the meeting. Can we take apologies?
Good morning and thank you, Chair. It's the following apologies. Mr. Honorable Jafta, who's unable to attend, who's currently in a flight. And then we've also received an apology from the Deputy Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Chair, who's unable to attend the meeting. Those are the apologies received, Chair.
Okay. Being the case as it may, today, can you fly to the agenda, Ara?
Recording in progress.
Okay. Can I, yeah, continue? Continue. There's only one part which we all agreed that it should be standing, except if it is not there, the correspondences. And I know there is one, although we will have, after we have done with the department, we will then go to take a correspondence before adjournment. Okay. Having said so, thank you, Honorable Minister. Can I know it's a Friday, sometimes it's difficult to deal with heavy stuff, unfortunately. We all agreed to the assignment given to us. Thank you for gracing this meeting together with I see the DGs also present. Can I give it to you, Honorable Minister?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members, Team DMRE. We're here today to present on the IPP procurement program. And I would imagine that because that is quite a technical and content-based presentation, it will be correct for me to hand it over to the DG and hopefully the head of the IPP office. But what is important about this presentation is that it is giving the historic background of the IPP office, how it was established, what was the purpose, why was it established, and therefore, as well as the procurement program will at the same time be in a position to assess whether it is fulfilling the objective it was set for. So if with your agreement, Honorable Chairperson, I hand over to the DG to lead the presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Good morning to you. Good morning to the Honorable Chairperson, honorable members and colleagues from the department, including the public that's in this meeting. Chairperson, the presentation is mainly in two parts, which is the first part, which is just giving the members presentation on the rationale and mandate of the IPP office and the rationale behind the IPP procurement program, and then we'll move into discussing the structure and the status of the program as requested by the committee. So I will, in the main, from my side, deal with part one of the presentation as represented, as indicated there on the content, and then I will then hand over to Maduna Ngobeni, who's the project officer from the IPP office, to present on number 2 to number 4, which focuses on the structure and the status of the procurement programs that the IPP office has undertaken on behalf of the department. Next slide, please. Chairperson and members, with regard to the rationale for the IPP procurement program, the IPP procurement program was established around 2010, and in the main, it was established to facilitate procurement of new generation capacity from the private sector, in line with, at the time, the IRP 2010. This was done following a decision, a government policy decision taken in 1998 to allow the private sector to participate in the electricity supply industry in a manner that encourages competition within the sector and take advantage of changing global financial market and private finance that is generally available to invest in this type of projects. But then what had happened, because I mean, as a country, we have a monopoly that is ESCOM. The IPP office was established to in a manner that did not sort of put ESCOM at the center of the procurement, but in a way that would allow the private sector to come in and participate in a program. And the rationale was that we wanted to allow for private sector to be able to raise capital and build the required generation capacity while sharing in the associated risk, specifically during construction of these projects. I mean, specific to risk, the model, unlike the government-built programs, is based on the IPPs taking the construction risk, meaning the consumers only pay for the energy that is produced when the plant is operational. So should there be delays or challenges with the project, there is no payment to the IPPs. Or for example, should the IPP construct a plant and the plant does not operate for whatever reason, there is no cost to obviously the consumers and the government, and that's basically the core of the IPP procurement program. The program included procurement from various technologies in line with the government policy of energy mix. And this included cleaner tail coal technologies, including renewables, gas, and coal. And as I'd already indicated, these technologies were to be built in accordance with the IRP 2010. Next slide, please. Members, with regard to, in order for the government to undertake this procurement, the IPP office was established, and it was established as a vehicle to support the department during the procurement of the new generation capacity. In the main, it was recognized that the procurement of power generation capacity is a complex process, and when one looks at the investment amount involved, it required the department to have access to a number of specialists that are required in designing and assisting in the evaluation of the bids when they are received from the IPP, from the various IPP bidders. And the IPP office was therefore established to support the department in this regard. The office is established on the back of a memorandum of agreement between the department, the DBSA, and National Treasury. The department mandate with around the IPP office is in line with the Section 34 determinations that the minister would usually issue, where the department plays the role of the buyer, of the procurer. The department plays the role of the procurer. Then the Development Bank of South Africa, the DBSA, role in this regard assist in facilitating the procurement of goods and services to support the IPP office. The IPP office is not a separate juristic entity. Therefore, the DBSA, where there is a need for the IPP office to do procurement from an operational point of view, enters into agreement on behalf of the IPP office. So the administration of the IPP office is on the back of the systems at the DBSA. The National Treasury role is in managing the project development facility for the office. The IPP office is predominantly self-funding. So basically the funding of the IPP office is through the monies that are paid for by the bidders during the bidding process. And this money is therefore managed by National Treasury through obviously the DBSA. In a nutshell, that is the structure of the IPP office. Next slide, please. In terms of the mandate between the IPP office and the department, the IPP office has two specific roles that it undertakes on behalf of the department. The first one being the management of the procurement process, the final approvals in terms of the work that is done in the IPP office with regard to the procurement of the IPPs happens in the department in line with the government procurement frameworks. So the IPP office assists in developing the terms of reference or the RFP or the request for proposal. The IPP office assists the department with the evaluation of the bids and the engagement with the market or potential investors. Once the procurement has been completed and the IPPs are ready to construct or they are operating the plants, the IPP office also support departments with contract management, because you will see later on in the presentation that there are various contracts that we enter into with the IPPs, and in the main, one of the contracts being the implementation agreement, which basically is the agreement is the commitment by the IPPs when it comes to economic development. So the IPP manages that contract and monitors and evaluate the work that the IPPs are doing, or the commitments that the IPPs would have entered into. Next slide. I will, at this stage, with your permission, Minister and Honorable Chairperson, hand over to Mr. Maduna Ngobeni, who will go into the details on the status of the procurement programs. Over to you, Maduna.
Chair, we can't hear Mr. Maduna.
Maduna.
You seem to be too far from the mic.
DJ?
Minister, I will then proceed. I'm not sure what's the challenge on Maduna's side. Maybe it's the network.
Okay.
Are you there, Maduna? Okay. Honorable members and Chairperson, with regard to the programs, the first part of this presentation, I will share with the members the presentation on the process or the stages that the procurement process for the IPP procurement program follows. There are a number of steps that we follow during the IPP procurement program, and with the first step in the main being the procurement, the request for proposals.
DJ, can you hear me, DJ?
Yes, Maduna. Okay, you can proceed.
Okay, thanks. Apologies for that. I think it's the mic. It was not set properly. I was saying thanks, DG, and also Minister, good morning, and also the Chairperson. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to the members as well of the committee. Just to go through the slide, you will see that it's 1 up to 6 there on top, which is the process that we go through, starting from the first part, which is the concept development. So the concept development got to do with, before we start drafting the RFP, we need to be on the same page in terms of what needs to go into the RFP itself. And that got a process on its own, engaging the role players involved, including ESCOM, the DTIC. They need to be on board in terms of what goes into the RFP. There are various aspects of the RFP that needs to be considered. If you can click on that RFP approval process, I will then take you through that process. So firstly, the concept needs to be approved by ESCOM, meaning that ESCOM needs to give us the parameters in terms of what kind of power generation they're looking for. And then once they've approved the concept, we need to go to National Treasury to get the in-principle support in terms of the support that government will give to the program, that particular round that we are procuring. And then also we need to go to GTIC in terms of the BEE that needs to go in, and any exemption that or deviation that is required. And then, and Treasury as well, rather, we also need, if there's a deviation that's required under the triple PFA, we need to apply for that before the RFP is concluded. And then lastly, from a licensing perspective, we need to engage with NERSA and understand what license requirement they want to impose, and they want the bidders to be aware of when they bid. They should know that this is expected from them. And then once the concept is complete, we moved into an RFP drafting phase. We got a draft RFP now, which we would have to take it back to ESCOM as well. Now the RFP, now it includes the PPA, the IA, the DA, PPA being the power purchase agreement, IA being the implementation agreement, DA being the direct agreement. The direct agreement is signed with the lenders. I think you will see later on. The implementation agreement is the one that is signed by the department. Power purchase agreement is signed by ESCOM and the developers, or the IPPs rather. So those documents need to be consulted at that point because they go together with the RFP documents and they are not negotiable. So once we are out in the market, we cannot change the documents substantially. Whoever that bids must accept those documents as they are. And then we also then engage with the regulator to say, this is the documents that we need now, we will release to the market. The regulator will also give its thumbs up. If there's a gas element, for instance, the gas program, it means we need to also involve TNPA. Even in the regulator side, we need to talk to both the different sides of the regulator, being the electricity licensing and also the gas licensing. Those needs to be aligned. And then finally, once we got all of those consultation, we will then move into the final stage of the RFP, whereby ESCOM will also take it through its governance process. It normally goes to the board of ESCOM for approval. And then we will also take it through the department, through the bid specification committee, and then goes to the BAC. And thereafter, it goes to the accounting officer for final approval. We can click on back. So that's the process that before you release the RFP, you need to go through to get it ready and make sure that everybody, once we got the preferred bidders, they can sign those agreements. Now, once the RFP is out in the market, which is stage 2, there is a process whereby the IPP initiate a bidders conference where everybody could ask different questions. And all of those questions need to be responded to in writing through what we call briefing notes, so that everybody knows what was said and who asked a question and what was the question and how we responded to that question. And those briefing notes, they form part of the RFP at the end of the day. And then once that process has been completed, bidders, they're normally given about 4 months from the time when we release the RFP to the time when they bid. Obviously, the 4 months is dependent on the type of the program that we're running. For other programs, it might take longer if we're doing it for the first time, to give people the opportunity to scrutinize the documents and ask questions. Then we move to stage 3. Once the preparation process is complete, people, they need to submit the bid. They will submit the bids to the IPP office. There's a process of receiving those bids. We don't accept bids ahead of time. So we will accept bids on the day of closing. We will say from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you must submit bid around that time. Once you miss that deadline, we will not accept that bid, and we will not accept the bid before, a day before also. So once it's in there, we initiate the evaluation process. You can click on that evaluation thing so that to show you how the evaluation works. So the bid normally got different streams. It got technical, legal, environmental, land, economic development, and finance. We create 4, or should I say 6 different streams that looks at the bid separately. We got 6 rooms at the IPP office whereby each of the streams sits in their own rooms. They don't interact with the other streams. And then they would then go, let's just look at technical, for example. Then technical will have its own portion of the bids that deals with the technical. And then they want to evaluate that bids and create a report, which is called a technical report. And then that report get independently reviewed within the TAs themselves. And then from there, you're gonna have a technical report, which is a final report that goes into the evaluation report. So each and every stream will create its own report, which goes into the main report. And that main report is the report that then constitute the BEC, which we call Bid Evaluation Committee report. Now, if I may say, the different streams are independent. They're not necessarily employees of the IPP office. So we go and appoint independent firm. For instance, on legal, we go and appoint a law firm that will do the legal evaluation. On finance, we go and appoint an audit firm, independent audit firm that will come and do the financial evaluation. Technical, same thing, legal, environmental, land, do the same thing. Thanks, you can go back. So that's the process. So that process alone, it normally takes about 2 months to get to concluding the evaluation and also get the BAC to approve the outcome of the evaluation, and then the accounting officer to also sign off for the minister to announce. So that process alone, it takes about 2 months. Because there's also a clarification process that I didn't highlight there, that once you finish the evaluation, there are certain things that you still want to engage or ask the bidders. There's a process of sending clarification out to them and ask specific questions for them to respond. But that's not a process of supplementing the bid. So it's more about clarifying certain things that are not clear. Then once the preferred bidder has been announced, they get given 4 months to get to financial close. That's stage 4. So they get given 4 months. They say they've got 4 months to get to financial close, and then they need to do whatever authorization that is outstanding on their side. They need to finalize those. They need to engage with the banks to try and understand the lending, the finance that they need to obtain for the project. And then from our side, as the department, will also be going through the process of getting a concurrence from the Minister of Finance. Eskom will also be going through a process of getting a board approval to enter into these agreements. That includes Section 54 from the DPE minister. All of that needs to be in place before we can sign the agreement and say we're ready to start the construction. And then once all those authorizations are in place, the minister will then sign the implementation agreement and the direct agreement. Eskom will sign the PPA, which is the power purchase agreement. And then we get into stage 5, which is the construction. Now, in this stage, the bidders will be given about 24 months at most to build the power plant. But that's normally 24 months is for wind and PV. If it's gas, you give them more than 24, roughly 36 months to build a gas-fired power plant, because it takes much longer as compared to wind and PV. Then the IPP office will be monitoring the construction together with Eskom under the PPA, and then any delays by the IPP get penalized. They lose 2 days for 1 day late under the contract. So the contract gets smaller and smaller if you are not finishing construction, up to a point where it can be terminated if still not ready for construction. So once the 24 months is up, we expect the plant to start operating. And then the IPP office will then monitor, as the DG indicated, will then monitor the operations of the plant and make sure that the plant complies with the commitment they've made at bid, such as socio-economic development, job creation, and all of those elements that I will talk to probably later. Next slide. So these are the agreements that I've referred to earlier on. So you got the IPP right on top there, which the IPP will sign the power purchase agreement with Eskom in terms of the energy that we'll be selling, and the price will also be in that power purchase agreement. And then the same IPP will also sign the implementation agreement with the department, which is the agreement that's signed by the minister. That's the agreement that contains the government support, which we require concurrent from National Treasury for. And the same agreement contains the commitment that the IPP have made in terms of economic development. Those commitment goes in there, and then that's what gets monitored by the IPP office. Then there's another agreement that gets signed between Eskom and government. Government in this regard is National Treasury, DPE. They signed the government support agreement, government framework support agreement. This is the agreement that stands behind Eskom, that to say, if you fail to recover your money from the regulator, the money related to the IPPs, the government would pay for that cost. So that's covered by the government support agreement, but this is not an agreement that it's available to the bidders. It's just between government and Eskom. So then in the middle there, you got the lenders, which is the direct agreement that I referred to earlier on. So the direct agreement is signed by all the parties, Eskom, the department, and the IPP. This is the agreement that ensures that if the IPPs fail to pay for the debt that they've borrowed from the banks can take over the power plant. It's just like when you buy a house, and if you can't pay for it, the banks can take the house. So it's the same, apologies, it's the same arrangement that it's in place under that agreement that allows the banks a step in right in an event the IPP is failing to operate the plant. Next slide. So this is from bid window 1, just explaining the process and the date on which each RFP was released to the market, you will see that from the first block day between the one, we had about 1,425 megawatt procured. What is operational as we speak, it's 1,415 megawatt. So sometimes there's a shortfall. You find that the plant was built, but it's not necessarily built to full capacity. So it reduces slightly. That's what we call installed capacity and what is procured. So that's why there's a difference there. Between the two, it was 1,040 megawatt. What is operational as we speak is 1,033 megawatt from 19 projects. Between the one was 28 projects. Between the three, we got about 1,452 megawatt procured. What is operational is 1,428 megawatt from 16 projects. You will see in the middle there, we explained the date when it went to the market and when it closed for bid submission and when they reach commercial close. Roughly from, if you look at it from the RFP release to financial close, if you look at it, trace it from all the different rounds, it takes about a year to run the program and also get to financial close. For instance, between the three, the RFP went out to the market in May 2013, but we reach financial commercial close in 2014. It's like a year. You can trace all of them, they're more or less around that. With an exemption of between the four, because there was the impulse between the department and ESCOM in 2014. The RFP went out to the market in 2014, and then the preferred bidders were announced in 2015, but we only closed the program in 2018. So that's the difference there in that particular program. But in terms of megawatt, you will see there's 2,205 megawatt, what is operational at 2,130 megawatt. It's one project that is not yet reached commercial close in between the four. And then the same thing in between the 3.5, the one just before 4, there's one project there. That was 200 megawatt. That's a special project. So it's the CSP, what we call it concentrated solar. So this plants, it can operate as a dispatchable plant as opposed to the other ones. So that round does. So there was one project that was signed, and then the other one was not signed. It got into that impasse with ESCOM. And as a result, it got signed very late together with the between the 4 project. Hence, it's still under construction. And that project, it's a CSP project. But it's also faced with a lot of challenges from a construction point of view. Hence, it also got slightly delayed together with the one that is on between the 4. Next slide. So then risk mitigation, I think if you can see it, I think now starting from 2020, when the new IRP was released, we started a new program, or new programs, should I say. We released the RFP in August 2020 with 1,998 megawatts. Actually, we intended to procure 2,000 megawatts, but we managed to procure 1,988 megawatts. Technicalities in terms of what the cap, in terms of how far you can go when you procure without necessarily exceeding the determination issued by the minister. Then you can see the timelines there. On that program, we only managed to reach to construction 1,150 megawatts. The balance is still under discussions. We also, it included the car power project here that debate in terms of how we close them. But I think in the main, we're looking at a closing majority of them by end of March this year. So if we close all of them, which means it should able to take us to that 1,988 megawatts, or should I say, if we close majority of them, depending on how the process goes with those. And then we got then between the 5, it had 2,583 megawatts that we procured. The total procurement that we went out to the market for is 2,600 megawatts. I think the same as the risk mitigation. It's just the way in which the projects are configured. And to prevent exceeding what you had determination for, you then end up procuring just slightly less than the 2,600 megawatts. So what is under construction on this one, meaning the project that we have concluded, we got them all the way to financial close, it's 420 megawatts. But we have signed majority of these projects, probably about, well, how would I say, it's about 1,780 something megawatts that we have signed to date on these projects. But those that are under construction, it's 420. The other ones, they should be getting to construction soon as well. We expect that this project, if we conclude all of them on time, we should be able to start getting the first one, which we signed, we should be able to start getting megawatt on grid towards the end of the year, early next year, November, some of them. So between the six, it's the same. We released an RFP. On this one, the RFP was for 420 megawatts that we intend to procure. We released it in April 2022, and we eventually announced the preferred bidders in December 2022. The delay there is because there was the request to increase the megawatt. Initially, it was 2006, and then we end up increasing it to 4,200 to try and deal with the current energy shortage quicker. But for the grid constraint, we couldn't get there. We only appointed 1,000 megawatt on that. And in terms of construction, there isn't any project that is in construction. I think we are in that phase where we are engaging, trying to get all the required approval, concurrence from National Treasury, ESCOM going through its own board approvals. We expect that we should be able to conclude that and reach to commercial close by April this year. And then immediately after that, they're going to start constructing the projects. Then they're going to have 24 months from there to get the project into the grid. We expect that around 2024, we should start getting the project generating, especially the PV project, because they finished the construction much earlier compared to the wind project. But because on this one, we don't have wind, so majority of them will finish around 2024. Except for the fact that there might be grid issues that pushes some of the project out from a timeline perspective. But the expectation is that in terms of the RFP, they should be online around 2024, meaning next year. Then on storage, the RFP for storage should go out end of this month. And then we expect that commercial close, it should be next year, 2024. And I think, as I've mentioned, that once we have closed the RFP, there's a process of evaluation. The preferred bidder should be announced around November, and then we get to financial close the following year. And then we think if we get it right, we should be able to connect them in 2025. We'll start connecting some of the project there on the grid. We try to push the program and streamline some of the timelines to have these megawatts on the grid as soon as possible. But sometimes the grid does not allow it, and then end up pushing some of the project out. Gas project, there's a 3,000 megawatt that we are looking at from a gas perspective. And we believe that Q1 of 2023, we should be able to release the RFP to the market. We're still going through the process that I've explained earlier on to get all the stakeholders online, aligned in terms of what needs to happen and where, and those who needs to give guidance, for instance, from a ports infrastructure point of view, because it's a gas program. It will definitely involve the ports. Next slide. So just by way of location, to show where the projects are located, you will see that the majority of the projects are located in the Northern Cape. And in fact, it's over 60% of the projects are located in the Northern Cape. And then you got the Western Cape there. And then you also got the Eastern Cape. And then a bit of project in Free State, Northwest, and then Mpumalanga. I think there's only one project in Mpumalanga, which is a biomass project somewhere in Gondwana. And then you got Limpopo with about 3 projects. So in Gauteng, we got a couple of projects there, which is mainly landfill gas project, which generates electricity using the gas that comes from the landfills. But you will note that on the slide, we also included the RMIPP projects. That's why you start seeing some of the project in other areas that you would not normally see. We also got the gas project, which is the PCAS. That's why you see a project in the Richards Bay area and East London, or should I say the Kucha area. So that's got to do with the risk mitigation project. And I think there's a lot of other projects in other areas that we're starting to see because of the great constraint. Next slide. So now, going forward, the minister made another determination, which we call it the third determination since the IRP 2019 rather. So now the third determination, it takes about 13,540 megawatt of PV and wind, which needs to be procured. Round 7 will be covering this one. And then we also got 1,231 megawatt of storage, which we need to procure. We are currently at the design phase. Given the fact that in between those 6, we couldn't procure megawatt because of the grid, we have learned that we need to engage more and we need to have an agreement in terms of how the grid will be reserved for this program just for a particular period until we finish the procurement and then be opened thereafter, because there's a lot of activities happening. By the time we go to the market with the RFP, we would have been in agreement in terms of the grid availability, and we would know that there's grid here and there and there. But by the time we select a preferred bidder, that grid is taken. So it's important that there's an alignment and there's a grid that gets reserved for round 7. And we're in discussion with ESCOM in terms of the rules, in terms of how that would work. Next slide. Next slide. So just to give a key achievement to date, we have about 134 IPPs, which has been selected as preferred bidders. And out of that 134, we procured 11,904 megawatts from IPPs. What is operational already is 6,106 megawatts. From, in fact, the numbers, they keep on moving. Actually, now we're sitting at about 91 IPPs that are already operational. So in terms of the energy generated, you will see they generated about 82,397 gigawatt hours of energy that came from that. And then the total investment is about 332 billion rand. You will see that most of the investment are in rand because we have taken a view that we don't take foreign currency in terms of indexing to the tariffs. So even if the investors, they bring in whatever currency they bring, they will have to take their returns in rand. So they take a view in terms of the investment they're making, and also they need to hedge the rand. But to minimize their risk, they would then also borrow majority of the money locally. Next slide. So in terms of economic development, as I've mentioned earlier on, each and every project is required to make commitment in terms of how much they're going to spend locally and how much they're going to spend on BEE. So you will see they, in terms of socio-economic development, that's about 2.7 billion rand that goes into that. And then we also got about 33% of the shareholding across the different projects on average. It goes to Black South Africans, and then about 9% goes to the communities where the projects are located. And then we believe that the expenditure, the actual expenditure to date is about 80 billion to BEE. And then we also calculated number of jobs that would be created on these projects, which is about 76,000 job years. So this is just a calculation, a measure in terms of the contract to say one job, when you calculate it from a contract perspective, it amounts, it's equivalent to one person employed for 1 year. That's what it is. That's why the numbers, they say 72,000. But if you were to count it, the actual individual, it will not be like that. But this just for contractual purposes, so that if you got a person who's employed for 2 days, you shouldn't count that as a job. So you need to count it as a job if you got a person that's employed for 1 year at least. So if you employed 10 people for 2 days, that still doesn't count as a job. So you need to add up the hours so that it gives you a year to count. Even if you employed 100 people for 5 days, it could probably result into 1 job. That's basically what this means. Next slide. Thank you, DG. Thank you, Minister and the Chair. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Madonna. Chairperson, Honorable Minister, that's the presentation. In a nutshell, it highlights the approval processes that we follow and the number of parties that are involved. While the department is central to the procurement process, we also set out to share with the members the fact that there are a number of parties that are involved before, for example, the request for proposal goes out to the market, and their consent in the process is very, very important because they are a party to some of the contracts that needs to be signed at the end of the day. The other point that I just want to emphasize has to do with the fact that all these IPPs, the contracts that they've signed are 20-year contracts with Eskom in a form of PPA, and then obviously the other commitments in terms of the other contracts are also around 20 years. The last point I want to, the second last point I want to emphasize is the one around the fact that all these IPPs, with the contracts that they sign, they have an obligation to deliver. And for whatever reason, if they decide to up and go, the contracts allows for government and Eskom to obviously recoup or to intervene and make sure that the IPPs are held to the commitments that they had made. So the IPPs cannot just up and go once they've signed the contracts. The last point that I wanted to make that maybe was not, didn't come out in the presentation in terms of the capacity that has been delivered. I think the program to date has in terms of specifically just the renewables, has procured just around 12,000 megawatts, and over 6,000 megawatts of that is already connected to the grid and online. And the 50% of that is what was procured from bid window 1 to bid window 4. And the remainder, which is the other 6,000, is what we have procured under the RP 2019, which is basically bid window 5, risk mitigation, and bid window 6. So I thought I should just emphasize on those. Back to you, Honorable Minister. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson, we will be ready to take questions and answer the difficult questions that will come our way. I hand over back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, that's the presentation. Can I get questions of clarity and short comments? I see the hand of Honorable Phillips. I see the hand. Honorable Phillips. I see the hand of Honorable Masaule. I see. I see the hand of Honorable Madogwe. I see the hand of Honorable Malinga. So I did very right. I see the hand of Honorable Likov. Then Honorable Zungola. Can I start with Honorable Phillips?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. I'd like to apologize for not putting my camera on, but unfortunately I have load shedding. I would just like to take this opportunity to say thank you for the presentation. And I have a few questions. Does the department have a list of preferred service providers for the specialized departments, legal, accounting, etc., for the valuation purposes, or does each one go out to tender? My second question is, how many IPPs have had action taken against them for not being on time to date? My third question is bid window 6. There's been no power produced from that. Why was there a bid window if there was no grid? My fourth question is, we're not seeming to have a very high success rate for producing powers for these bid windows. Why don't we just open up generation to prospective producers? My fifth question is, what is being done to increase grid capacity? And then my last question, I just want to know, why are we getting two different figures? On slide 9, the production is 61,106 megawatts, and on slide 14, it's 11,904 megawatts. Is the 6,000 what's actually being produced now, and the 11,000 odd what is envisaged, or are we getting 11,904? If that can just be clarified. Thank you so much, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Masaule.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings to yourself, honorable members, the Minister, the DGs, and everybody who is in the platform. Chair, I have quite a few questions. The first one would be related to the declaration of the national state of disaster, which was in response to the electricity crisis. Now, how does the department plan to minimize the lead time in the IPP procurement stages, so as to allow faster turnaround of key remedial actions? And related to that, does it mean that the declaration of national state of disaster imply that some projects will be exempted from legal clause, because it has been proven that there has been time consuming, which countered the agency of bringing more capacity into the ESCOM grid? The second point, Chair, would be that what were the reasons, Minister, why 8 of the 11 preferred bidders struggled to achieve legal close in June 2020 in the RMIPPP? And what actions is the department taking if no legal close is achieved in March 2023, because it will further delay what it seeks to achieve? And what actions will the department take if no financial close is achieved in April 2023 in terms of the preferred bidders in bid window 6? Chair, the other point I want to make is that the land that ESCOM is willing to give, I think it's about 31,000 hectares, which is adjacent to the power stations of ESCOM. They made mention that they want to avail that. Will the department take you know, are they going to take an opportunity to consider that building renewable projects which will be aligned to the design of bid window 7, repurposing that land? I am of the view that at some point ESCOM should compete with the IPPs. At some point, there must be ESCOM entering solar PVs, wind farms, and all of those things. So is the department thinking along those lines? Chair, I will make other points at a later stage, Chair, if dependent on the responses. Thank you very much.
Okay, Honorable Matoga.
Thank you, Chairperson. Greetings to everyone in the meeting. I also want to just quickly welcome the report. I just have a few questions or issues rather. And I think the main one is that one of the reasons, or perhaps what one assumes to be one of the reasons why we are in the state that we're in right now in terms of energy crisis, is the two departments, which would be DMRE and public enterprise, or specifically ESCOM and the DMRE, sort of either speaking in silos or not speaking in the same language. I remember in the last meeting that we had, or the last joint meeting to be specific, where we were asking why is it that the IPPs seem to be way extremely expensive as compared to other energy generating sources. And I think I would want to actually even want to bring this question here, because I think then the response from the CEO of ESCOM was that they do not deal with IPPs. It's the IPP office. They are just given the names of IPPs that would be providing a service, and therefore they do not have a way of entering that space, which was also extremely worrisome, because how do you then determine who are the best suited people to do the job? Secondly, there's also been a lot of pronouncements, even on media, particularly by ESCOM. I think even outside ESCOM, even in SCOPA, where it was realized that some of the contracts that the state had become entangled in were extremely ridiculous. They were extremely expensive. And at this point in time, no one could actually sort of give a way forward in terms of what should happen to those contracts. So I'm just interested as well in terms of, since those issues were flagged, that some of the service providers that are being used are either extremely expensive, and that sometimes the contracts that we've entangled in, because I think that the issue, there was also an issue that some of the contracts must be reviewed so that ESCOM and the state, and particularly the taxpayer and the citizens of South Africa, are not subjected to overpaying for services that should have actually not been as expensive for them, especially because energy is the most important resource that we need at this point in time. It needs to be as accessible as possible. It also needs to be as stable as possible. So what is being done, or what was done in terms of reviewing those contracts, and how did we actually even end up with finding ourselves in a situation where we're stuck with contracts and IPPs that are overcharging us, and especially at a crisis like this? The second one, it's the issue of whether it is possible. I don't know if that is the case currently, but whether it is possible for the IPPs, or even all service providers, for instance, even the ones that are that are part of the the bidding, the process right now, that whether they can be actually made. Sorry about that. My network is also just a bit, yeah. whether they can actually be made public, and especially the terms of reference of their contracts, and also the terms the terms of those contracts of these service providers that we have, so that we don't find ourselves in the long run also stuck with the same issue that we're having now. And then my third question is perhaps on the proclamation that was made about I think about 71 blacklisted service providers by ESCOM. And I'm interested in whether there are any IPPs or any service providers that have been approved or been licensed by this department that are found in that 71, and whether the department has actually undertaken any criminal cases against those if they are there. And then the other question, the fourth question, I think it comes to the issue of why is government or the state giving primarily the role of renewable resources to independent or the private sector, if I may put it that way. Why is it? Because surely we would have known that ESCOM or coal generation would have had at one point to be supplemented with renewable energy, to be supplemented with nuclear energy and all other sources. So why has the state and the department not undertaken the responsibility of creating a green energy industry or something related where they are the ones that are actually providing those power generation alternatives? And then I think the last question is on the comment about service providers that perhaps would be given a contract and then they do not do the work. I understand that there are contracts that are binding them and there are legal steps that are undertaken. But I'm just interested because a contract is just a paper that's written in black and white. But I'm just interested in whether the department has actually found itself in a situation where we are having service providers that are that deviate or do not do the work that they're supposed to do. If that is the case, can we get details around that, and what are the processes in terms of making sure or holding those accountable? And why I am asking this question specifically is that we often get reports on a number of things of people who are not doing work just within the department, and you find out that the issues of holding those people accountable, it's not done the way that it's supposed to be done. So I'm interested in these service providers that are bound by contracts, whether they are actually taken to task in the event that they do not do the work that they've been contracted to do. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings to all to yourself, members of the Portfolio Committee, the department led by Minister Mantashe, and our committee staff and everybody on call. Chairperson, let me also welcome the presentation by the department and say it is a very progressive, Chair. But my worry, Chair, is that with all the work that the IPP office is doing, they seem not to dispel the narrative out there in the country that DMRE is just sitting and not doing anything to ensure or mitigate this load shedding, Chair. Also the issue that now we get clarity that it is ESCOM that approves the RFP. No process has gone without ESCOM being part, of which it's something that was disputed by the disgraced GCEO, who now laments things that we don't know. Chairperson, if maybe Mr. Maduna can just clarify me on the slide, there are no slide numbers, Chair. The key IPPP achievements to date, maybe I need more clarity, Chairperson, on the 82,397 energy generated by renewables, because of all the things that he has mentioned, of the bid windows that the megawatts that they wanted to procure, they could not be connected to the grid. But this slide says there is energy generated. Also, the last one, Chair, that he concluded on in terms of employment. There is 76,002 jobs, yeah. So does this include, or it excludes the 1 day, 2 days employment that has been done, Chairperson? And if also he could clarify me on the 9% of the shareholding by local communities, what does that mean, Chairperson? I will stop there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Honorable Lekov.
Thank you, colleagues. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions regarding the RIP determination process. First of all, you know, I think it's fair to say if you look at this and you have an understanding for the mechanics of the legal kind of processes that have been created through this entire mechanism, it seems to be that the RIP process is actually, or determination process, is really a kind of like a mechanism by which the state can retain control over the power sector in terms of monopoly, because it seems to be designed specifically to make sure that Eskom remains the dominant monopoly you know, power producer in the entire energy mix for the country. Now, you know, the RIP process, if you look at it objectively, is actually suppressing the onboarding of new generation capacity into the grid. So I just wanted to ask if a serious look had been given by the department to considering about the suspending or doing away of the IPP program process, and rather just opening up the market to bring on energy as and when it's possible to do so. I also just wanted to say that, you know, if you look at the overall energy demand and then what's needed, there is absolutely no plan that exists right now which is ready or available to meet that requirement of what we need to bring onto the grid to do away with, you know, the energy crisis. So to me, I mean, like, given the fact that we're sitting on stage 6 load shedding, just it seems the most logical thing to do would be to open up the market to allow people to bring on energy as quickly as they possibly can. The other thing I just wanted to ask is, you know, Eskom has an obligation, and so does the country, to decarbonize our economy. And there's no real kind of mention in this at all of how we achieve net zero by 2050. And I just wanted to know, you know, like, there's a lot of information lacking in terms of planning. And all I'm seeing is really a lot of centralization of control over the entire market process to be able to achieve all these things. So I just wanted to find out, firstly, you know, if any plans have been given to open up the market and what the implications would be for that, because Eskom presently doesn't have any financial space to create its own generation capacity. It's really just hovering above the status quo. And secondly, you know, what planning is there around, especially with regards to IPPs, regarding the decarbonization process of our energy sector? Thank you.
Fundis.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to yourself, colleagues. Greetings to Umqwati and the department. My first question, Chair, is in relation to the considerations when it comes to IPPs on procurement from SMMEs. We note the challenges in our country on unemployment and how critical it is that small businesses are prioritized in terms of you know, procurement. That way you create more jobs. So I wanted to find out if there's any consideration when it comes to IPPs on the issues of SMMEs, including a consideration if they could dwell getting deeper on the issues of BEE, you know, considerations. That's the first question. The second one is if the minister can please update, give us an update on the floating gas power ship I think it is from Turkey. I picked up in the media that there was a legal battle with Outer. And also, why are floating power ships not an option instead of diesel? Then the third question is, what are the plans for clean burn technologies now that the president in the SONA disputed that the notion of abandoning coal, then the last question, Chair, is that whilst there are going to be IPPs operating and somewhat reducing the reliance on Eskom to generate and distribute power, provide power for basically the country's energy needs. The only concern I have is that if we are going to have mines, big factories, moving away from procuring power from Eskom and going to IPPs, is that not going to undermine and reduce the income generation for Eskom? And you find that Eskom is going to inadvertently lose out on lucrative contracts or lucrative customers, if I can put it like that. And then the end result is that you are going to have the poor citizens, poor municipalities who are battling to pay for electricity, being clubbed with Eskom. On the other side, you are going to have well-off industries, factories, mines, moving from Eskom to IPPs. And then you find that in the long run, Eskom will be systematically defunded. So I wanted to get clarity as to how is the balance going to be struck. In fact, not even a balance, but how is that going to be managed to make sure that Eskom is not indirectly or systematically defunded in the process of IPPs? Thank you.
Okay, Honorable Minister and the team.
Thank you, Chairperson. The team is going to take on technical questions. Let me just give generalized answers to some questions. There is this notion, particularly driven by the DA, that do away with bid windows. It has come twice in the questioning here, and just open up the market. When the embedded generation was totally regulated, we've removed all the caps on embedded generation. From where I'm seated, I hear this thing that there's 9,000 in the pipeline, but I can quantify what has been registered with NERSA. There is no 9,000 that is registered with NERSA yet. So the opening, there is an option of opening it up. But what people don't appreciate is that as we deregulate, we also remove the obligation on the state for any uptake agreement. So the state is not obliged to buy that energy. You're in the free market, you will sell your energy. People must buy your energy from where you are. And people don't get a debate on that reality, which comes to the opening up of the market, which has been done on embedded generation. The bid windows, on the other hand, give some guarantees because there is a contract with the state, and which must be met, and people must be obliged to fulfill the content of the contract. I was a little bit taken aback when Honorable Madokwe called the contract as being just a paper. It's not just a paper, it's binding conditions. And the state, that's why it must involve everybody, including Eskom, that there will be uptake of what is generated from bid windows. So we have a dual system going on. The bid windows at this point in time has been proven to be doing what it should do as opposed to the open market. But Let me give you another positive example of the embedded generation. Embedded generation, the last company we issued a license to for embedded generation was Goldfields. It has bucked the trend in the mining industry where there was a decline of 9.9% of production because of load shedding and inefficient rail system. Goldfields, because it has its own solar plant, it has grown by 10% year on year. So there are good stories and bad stories that you can tell about this particular matter. Now let me leave that and come to the national state of disaster. You know, a national state of disaster is to deal with the load shedding. Now, I think we've been emphasizing this as a department. We're not managing that space. Again, we're still not going to manage that space. There will be an electricity minister who manages that space. But our emphasis is that 6 power stations, coal-generated power stations, are having electricity availability factor of less than 50%. And that in that process, we lose almost above 7,000 megawatts of energy. And therefore we say if we want to deal with load shedding, there must be an emphasis on actually optimizing the work of the coal-generated power stations that are available and connected to the grid. And we think that is correct. And that emphasizes the point that it is misleading for people to think that renewable energy programs are dealing with load shedding. No, they're not. They're important, but their importance is in the medium to long term security of supply, not load shedding. Now, I'm leaving that, but leave it with the point that as we move with IPPs, we must appreciate that we're dealing with the overall energy plan. And now let me go to the ESCOM land. Will the department have the opportunity to build renewable energy? ESCOM should compete. ESCOM is actually allowed by IRP 2019 to move into renewables. So in terms of policy, nothing stopping any ESCOM to get. That's why when they repurposed Komati, which was decommissioned, they repurposed it to renewables, which tells you that there's no restriction to ESCOM on that. It's up to them if they want to compete and they are relaxing. Maybe they have problems of finances to be aggressive in that space. Now, so I'm just clearing the point that there is nothing in policy that stops ESCOM from getting into the renewable space. DMRE and DPE talking in silos. That is a perception. DPE is responsible for the operation of enterprises. Therefore, when it reports on ESCOM all the time, I want you to observe this. It will always report on the nitty-gritties of the operations there. When we talk on ESCOM, we always talk at policy level and regulatory level. So it can be the same. So that is not silos, it's this everybody running in his or her lane. That's it. There's no silos there. IPPs appear as expensive. Bid window 1, 2, 3, 4 were expensive. Bid window 5 came quite cost effective. But there's also an observation that we've made that a number of bidders were approved for bid window 5 couldn't reach financial close on time. And that tells us that that low price may have been tampered with artificially, but they will, I think the team will deal with that in detail. So those were expensive. I am one person who always argued with this consistently. Nobody has taken it up. It is not policy. Was that when the Minister of Finance say we're giving ESCOM X amount of money to take over the debt. It is always seen as what is it called? A bailout. It is always seen as a bailout. My argument is part of it is maybe a bailout, but big part of it is a premium the state pays for attracting a technology into the economy called renewables at a huge cost. I want you to look at bid window 1, it is around 6 rand per unit. Bid window 2 is about 3 rand per unit. Bid window 3 is about 2 rand a unit, which is much higher than the 89 cents that ESCOM used to sell its energy. So there was much of the money that goes to ESCOM in that way. Though it is said bailout, to me, it's not bailout, it's a premium the state is paying for a deliberate decision it took to attract a bilateral technology to the economy. Contracts, can they be published? I'm leaving that. Why is the state giving space to the private sector? I think that will require people to read the intention of establishing the IPP office. And then, because that intention does answer that question, but the team can answer it. And the state, in my own view, should still have the responsibility to build capacity because electricity is a public good. The narrative that DMRE is doing nothing, being not challenged, no. I think that one issue is, the DA organized a march to Lutuli House and they didn't talk about load shedding. They talk about where the Mantasha must go, to get my point. When people get attracted to a person, I know that I'm attractive for many reasons. I'm handsome, I look young, but I'm old and slow, but people get attracted to me. Then the narrative in the public space will be in the DMRE a little bit, but on quieter in the main. But what is important is that we have a responsibility as a department to deal with those issues at public level. We've equally a responsibility to ignore some of the myths that are just a myth. You ignore them. That is also a communication strategy. ESCOM, to ensure that ESCOM remains dominant. One time I had a discussion with an executive of ESCOM, I won't mention the name now, with the current cloud. And I said, but this thing is actually taking key clients of ESCOM away to ESCOM. What about the market share? And this person said to me, we're not worried about market share. And to me, I found that quite curious, and I'm still going to pursue that. Because as far as I'm concerned, ESCOM must be curious and be interested in the market share. And then there's an allegation that there's no plan to deal with load shedding. I think I'm quite keen to see the Minister of Electricity. And many people wanted me to be uncomfortable with that. I'm not uncomfortable with that. I'm very comfortable. But I want that minister to focus on load shedding. And to me, load shedding will be focusing on optimal operation of the current power stations. 2, it's acceleration of procurement of electricity for emergency. 3, it must be able to import energy from the neighboring countries. And 4, there must be a more increased focus on skills to ESCOM. And if those 4 are elements of the plan, we will overcome load shedding. Now, there's this question by Honorable Lekov that there's nothing on net zero by 2050, but all the programs that have been approved by the IPP, Honorable Lekoff, are all green programs. So whether you say it or not, the action talks to that issue. The floating power ships, what do we do with them? I think that is a different department's responsibility. We approved them because we thought that they would have been helpful. It was said that they were expensive, and I looked at the prices and I wondered what was expensive about these prices, because at 117 cents a unit, there's nothing expensive about that. And if we reduce the term to 10 years, it goes to 134 cents a unit. Nothing expensive about that. But it's an issue that we should look into. There's an issue that tries to actually squeeze everything else out of the space of energy except renewables. And that is an issue that we must deal with. Technically, if we must go to court about that. Abandoning coal, coal is going to be with us for a long time. And I think that is quite important to me, that there will be coal, but there will be other technologies growing. Renewables are going to grow faster. You are going to have gas, you're going to have nuclear, you're going to have hydro, you're going to have green energy that is coming through. So when you get all these mixtures, will be sustainable. The reducing the dependence on ESCOM, I've answered that question. But I want to leave the team to answer even whatever I've commented on. They are free to comment on it on the technical side. But I was giving these general answers to the questions. DG.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I will respond to some of the questions, and some of the questions that require the details. My colleague Maduna will also come in. Focusing on the questions from Honorable Phillips, there was a question around the list of companies that we use for evaluation of bids. The process that we follow is that every now and then through the DBSA, we appoint a panel of service providers from the different streams that my colleague indicated during his presentation. And every time there's a bid window, the IPP office will obviously issue a call to those on the panel, and they will put a price forward, and on the basis of the price that they put forward. So to be on the panel, it's almost like a pre-qualification from a capability or capacity point of view. And then at the point of running a bid window, the IPP office through the DBSA, they normally then go to these companies on the panel, and these companies would then bid a price, and then they will be appointed on the basis, obviously, of the cost that they put together. The information, then what happens is that at the end of each bid window, the information is made available as to which company was involved in which part of the bidding process. So this is information that we make publicly, available. Then there was a question around, have we penalized anyone who has not met the requirements? Yes, we have, and I will leave the details of that to Madonna, probably without necessarily mentioning the entity here or the company here, but they will give an example of what had happened and how we dealt with it. Bid window 6, why did we issue bid window 6 when there was no grid? Unfortunately, there is grid, but there is no grid in specific parts of the country. And as we sit here, there are many people or many investors who are busy developing projects in different parts of the country, which some of them we are not even aware of. So when we issue a bid, we may have a sense of who is working on what, but not everyone. So we are not in a position to know that the bids that will come, like in this case, will be mainly in this particular area. So it was not necessarily issuing the bid knowing there is no grid. The grid is there. What happened is that the projects that came through were mainly in a specific part of the grid. And I think Maduna can also go into the details about exactly what happened here. It had to do with the fact that when these projects went to Eskom to check for availability of the grid, at the point of bidding, there was the grid. And I think, again, on the process that Maduna, Mr. Ngobeni indicated, it takes some time before we get to a point of announcing the bidder. By the time we announce the bid, because of the fact that we've also allowed for people to do their own projects on the side, that part of the grid had already been taken by someone else. So that was part of the issue, but Maduna, Mr. Ngobeni can expand on that. The question around why don't we open up for bidders to bid, to go out there. As things stand today, nothing stops any developer from approaching anyone and developing a project for them. The program we are presenting here is one of the many interventions that we are pursuing to bring online additional capacity. So a project can go direct to Eskom if they want to negotiate a direct agreement with Eskom. Obviously, Eskom will, within what is permitted, look at that proposal from those companies. But what this program does not necessarily, its existence does not necessarily stop development of projects or restrict the market to follow, or restrict projects to follow only this route. The question around the different figures, as I had in my concluding remarks, I did indicate that, and maybe the mistake there is that I didn't mention the exact number. The 11,000 that Honorable Phillips refers to is what we have procured, what we've gone out and we received tenders, and we decided that it meets the criteria and it's at the right price and it falls within the limits of what we wanted to procure. We had indicated that that 11,000 number is what we have procured, what we have said to the bidders, you are now offered an opportunity to build and we'll sign a contract with you. The 6,000 is what is already built and is operational. So that's the difference between the numbers. Honorable Mahlaule, the minister has already dealt with two of your questions, so I would not go into those. You also raised the question about why are the 8 of the 11 bidders under the risk mitigation struggled. I will leave the details of that to Mr. Ngobeni. I think you also asked the question around are the timelines achievable? Even the one around, I think you asked the question around what will happen with between the 6 post-April 2023. Let me leave that to my colleague, Mr. Ngobeni. Honorable Madokwe, you asked the question around what was done with the reviewing of contracts prices. A few years back, I think around 2019, we were tasked by the minister, Mantashe, and at the time also Minister Godan, to look at the prices for the first bid windows of the renewable energy programs. Through the IPP office, we engaged the IPPs. We also engaged the funders, which is the bank behind these projects, to say how can we reduce the prices. Out of the options that we looked at, what came out as the most feasible and legally a doable option was to look at refinancing. And what do we mean by refinancing? For example, when you look at these projects, I mean, it's like someone who buys a car, goes to the bank, gets the money, and you agree to certain terms and conditions in terms of rates, and then that determines what you pay the bank every month. If you want to reduce what you are paying the bank every month, there are a number of options. You can either go extend the tenure and ask the bank to pay your car back over 10 years, which then will allow you to pay a lower rate, or you can ask for what they call refinancing, because at the time, obviously, when you went, the interest rate or the money was more expensive. So the option that was eventually settled on, which did not tamper with create legal challenges for all of us was that the projects can look at refinancing. A number of the projects have already come to us through refinancing, and we've signed off on them, and the tariffs have reduced. I don't have the details in front of me, and I don't think Mr. Ngobeni has the details in front of him as well, but this is information that we can share in terms of by how much the different tariffs have come down based on the IPPs that have come forward with proposals for refinancing. The contracts made public, I think like any contracts where there is some level of commercial sensitivity and competition, I don't think we will necessarily be in a position to make the various contracts with the details publicly available, but what we can make available is a generic contract which shows the terms. And as my colleague during his presentation indicated, when we put the tender out there, it goes out with the various contracts that the IPPs are expected to enter. So the generic contracts are already in the public domain, but we can make them available if the members would like to see them. The minister dealt with the issue around the state giving the primary role to IPPs. I think if we go back to history and look at when did we introduce the IPPs? We introduced the IPPs at the same time when Eskom was busy with the construction of Medupi and Busile. And if you look at the cost of Medupi and Busile, even before the escalation, you would see that Eskom would not have been able to do all these projects on its own at that point in time, because they were focused on the program around Medupi and Busile. Fast forward today, the minister, as he has indicated, yes, Eskom is allowed to undertake renewable energy projects. There is nothing that stops them from developing these projects. But I think the current challenges around their balance sheet problems is a reality that we have to face. And if we also look at some of the conditions that the Minister of Finance has actually placed to try and deal with the Eskom financial situation, I think that already indicates the limitations that Eskom would have in the immediate. But they are allowed to play in the space, so there is nothing that stops them to build new generation capacity. Honorable Mudaka, your last question had to do with, has any IPP not delivered or did it breach a contract? As I indicated, Mr. Ngobeni will give one example of one of these IPPs and what happened. Honorable Malinga, your question around the achievements, I will leave it to my colleague, Mr. Ngobeni Maduna, to unpack. Honorable Le Golf, have we looked at doing away with the IPP procurement program or process? As I said, there are a number of interventions, and this program is one of those interventions. If you look at the need for new generation capacity, I think for us to abandon this program now would create even bigger problems. No plan to do away with the energy crisis. The minister has responded to that. I won't respond. Plan to open up the markets. Yes, there are plans that have been communicated by the minister, and they've also been communicated during the State of the Nation around the unbundling of Eskom, which will create an independent transmission company, which will allow for easy trading of energy. So there are plans to do that. No mention of net zero by 2050, no plans for decarbonization. Yes, we did not talk about decarbonization today as we presented here, but these renewable energy programs that we are presenting here today are an outcome of the integrated resource plan, which takes into account during the planning our commitments in line with the nationally determined contributions. So what was presented here today is an element or part of what we're doing, towards decarbonizing the energy sector. The Honorable Zungula asked around the car power ship. Yes, there is a legal challenge by Outer, where Outer actually is challenging NESA's decision to grant the project a license. That is still part of the court process. From the department point of view, in line with all the challenges that were faced by the preferred bidder projects under the risk mitigation, we are aiming to finalize the projects by June 2023, and it's part of what my colleague will go into the details around. The minister has addressed the issue around the impact of the big companies doing their own power on the ESCOM revenue. Are there any plans for clean tech technologies? Yes, the department is looking at this. There is a project that pilot projects that we are undertaking through the Council for Geoscience, as an example, funded by the World Bank, which is piloting the carbon capture storage technology around Lianda in Mpumalanga. So there is work we are doing in this regard. I think I've touched on most of the questions that I have noted. If you've missed anything, we'll come back. But I would now, with your permission, Honorable Minister and Honorable Chair, hand over to Mr. Ngobeni to respond to some of the questions. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Minister and Chairperson. The first question got to do with the penalties. Yes, we penalized a couple of companies for not meeting what they've committed to. The penalties are in twofold. The first part is during construction, which is penalties that get imposed by ESCOM under the PPA. Those penalties relate to the loss of term. Maybe just to step back, the IPPs, they don't get money, so they go and borrow their own money to build the power plant. Whilst they are building the power plant, they don't get paid for anything. So they only get paid per kilowatt hour they've generated, and that will be from procurement, that will be like 3 years down the line. So they need to use that money to pay for their debt. So if they fail to get to financial close during the procurement process, there's a 200,000 per megawatt hour. That it's a what to call it, a bid bond, which could be pulled in case you fail to get there. But before we pull the bid bond, we need to make sure that from our side as the state, we are not at fault. We did not prevent them from reaching financial close. We did everything we could to get the project to financial close. If we didn't, and there are certain things that are still outstanding from our side, we can't pull that bid bond. Then during construction, ESCOM will then manage the PPA. For each day they are late in bringing the megawatts into the system, they lose 2 days on the contract. So meaning the contract gets shorter and shorter. So you can end up having 10 years instead of 20 years. And you can imagine what that does to your financing agreement, because your financing agreement will be like 15 years payment period, for instance. So that hits them hard. So they try very hard to make sure that during construction time, those PPA, they don't get reduced. So if they go back to ESCOM and ask for extension of the PPA, ESCOM normally penalize them, will say, no, if you want more time, you need to reduce the tariff. So then the IPPs are forced to reduce the tariff as a penalty during construction. During operations, then we come in, we monitor the commitment they've made. So if they've defaulted on certain things, we penalize them. To date, there are IPPs that they paid about 14 million rand in penalties for not, I'm not going to name those IPPs, but safe to say they did pay that money back to National Treasury, to the GTEC account, for not meeting certain obligations under the contract. And if they continue to miss those obligations, the contract can be terminated. But we haven't terminated any contract yet, but IPPs, they've paid millions for not adhering to some of the conditions that are in the contract. And then the question about bid window 6 on why we went out to the market, yet there was no greed. I think the DG answered that question partly, but I will add to it. So I'll add by explaining the process. So before we release the RFP, ESCOM released a document called GCCA, which explains where there is grid available on the network. So IPPs, when they prepare their bids, they based their preparation on the document that is out in the market to say these are the areas where there's grid. But in addition to that, we require the IPP under the RFP to go to ESCOM and ask for what we call a cost estimate letter, which indicates that there is grid available where you are building your project. So that cost estimate letter must come with a bid. So through the process, once they've submitted the cost estimate letter, we've evaluated, we selected all the projects that there is grid available where they are located. We then go back to ESCOM to do a final confirmation to say, we got this project. Is there still grid in those areas where you have given the cost estimate letters? And then ESCOM came back during the evaluation to say, look, because now there's a lot of activities in the private space where people, they do own build generation. In some of the areas that the project were aiming to build their power plant, there is no more grid anymore. And as a result, those projects couldn't be appointed. And mainly the project that are affected is wind projects, because most of the wind projects are located around the coastal areas. So the network around the coastal areas is not as strong as in a Mpumalanga area, for instance. So as a result, those areas were taken out much quicker by the private space. As a result, those projects were then not appointed. There wasn't a wind project appointed, but the allocation for PV, it was taken in full because it was 1,000 megawatts allocated. And then the other question, it relates to the RMIPP. If it doesn't reach legal close by March, what will happen? So firstly, the RMIPP, it's most of the issues that prevent it from reaching legal close, they stack up between the state and also between the IPPs themselves. So there are a number of things that the IPPs are battling with, but there are also a number of things that we need to sort out from our side to get to that process of reaching legal close. So if we couldn't finalize the issues from our side, we would not be in a position to terminate them. So at the moment, we are in discussion with ESCOM in terms of getting the project to get to legal close. And we have submitted the report in terms of what we believe we should do to get to legal close. And that report is being considered and it needs to go through the ESCOM governance process. If everything goes in according to the plan and everything that it's in preparation for legal close is accepted by the ESCOM board, which means we will close. But if there's something that comes back to say, look at this, maybe relook at certain elements of that particular report, it means we would have to go back to the IPPs who might not be in a position to reach a legal close as anticipated. But I must say the car powership, I think that's the other question. So the car powership, we do not foresee it getting to legal close in March for simple reason. ESCOM requires that they provide an indemnity agreement, meaning that there's a dispute around that because the project, they're saying they can't provide an indemnity agreement alone. So if there's an indemnity agreement that's required, it should be on all the projects. Be as it may, they've accepted to look at the indemnity agreement, but there's a back and forth in terms of the provisions of that indemnity agreement. We'll remember that that indemnity agreement was not part of the bid process. So it's something that came afterwards, having considered all the issues and the fact that there is the ATO case on the same time. So now Eskom feels that maybe they need to be protected for any other claims that might come down the line. As a result, they require this indemnity agreement. So in that way, we cannot then say we terminate Car Power because that indemnity agreement is not readily available. That's the one. And then bid window 6, yes, we got April as the date for signing. So what is expected is that from our side, we need to get Section 66 and 70, concurrence from the Minister of Finance. We need to get Eskom board approval to enter into those PPA. If all those approval becomes effective before April, we would definitely sign this project. But if somehow, somewhere, one approval is outstanding, it means that those agreements will not be signed. We will have to push them back. We need to get another date and make sure that those agreements are signed. We worked very hard with Eskom to get all those agreements sorted on time, and we are very optimistic that we'll be in a position to get all those approvals that are required before the date. If we have all the approval that are required and the IPPs themselves, they're not ready to sign, we can penalize them by terminating their preferred bidder status and take the preferred bid bond, which is 200,000 per megawatt. So that can be taken as a penalty for not closing. In terms of achievement, yes, firstly, there's a question about the jobs, on whether the numbers that we reflected there, they include the jobs per, how do we put it? I think it includes the jobs per day, as I've alluded to it. Yes, so the 76,000 jobs, I said it's job years, meaning that you need to employ a person for a year to count it as a job. If you didn't employ a person for a year, you can't count it as a job. And we are mindful of the fact that there are construction jobs that needs to take place. As a result, we are saying you count hours, so you can employ 2, 3, or 10 people, but those hours should constitute 8 hours a day for a year. And then if you add it up, that would make a job. So it could be that in that combination of the hours, if you didn't have sufficient hours, you could not, if it doesn't amount to a year, if you add up the hours, it would not constitute a job. So you need to get it up to a point where you add it up. You can employ 10 people, but if you add up the hours, they don't get to a year, that would still not be regarded as a job. So you got to add up the hours for all the different people to get you to the hours that you need to constitute a job in a year, which is 8 hours a day, excluding a weekend for a year. So that's that. And then in terms of the shareholding by communities, yes, it's 9% shareholding. So what that means is that each and every project will have to select a community in the areas where they're located, and then adopt that community and say the shareholding, that 9%, it's not 9% per se, but that's an average. So some projects, especially the old project, they've got as high as 40% community participation, some of them. So they will have to adopt a particular community and say this community owns that percentage of the project. Once they've adopted the community will then select certain people that will represent them in the project through a community trust, and then it would be managed as such. It's not an approach that we encouraged going forward, to have a majority % of the project, of the BEE stake taken by a community. Hence, that was kept in the subsequent round. So to say, at least you must have about 2.5 ownership directed to the community. And then the proceeds of that will be determined by the trust in terms of what happens there. But the view was that we needed more active Black participation in the project rather than communities, because communities that are not necessarily active. But you can have the socio-economic development as money that is directed to the communities to do the needs of the communities rather than giving them high shareholdings that they might not be in a position to manage. And that shareholding as well needs to be paid for by the development institutions such as the DBSA and IDC. And yes, in terms of gigawatt hours, I think the DG answered that. So that gigawatt hours, that the 82 gigawatt hours, 82,397 gigawatt hours, that's the energy generated from the projects to date. So that's the overall energy output. I've dealt with the Powership legal challenges. I think the DG dealt with that, but I've also dealt with the financial close or legal close related to that particular project. Thank you, DG. Back to you.
Thanks, Maduna. Honorable Minister, those are the responses to all the questions that have been raised. Back to you.
That is it, Honorable Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Minister, the DG and Mr. Ngobeni. Honorable members, there are the answers. Is there any follow-up in just 1 minute that you want to make? I see the hand of Honorable Phillips. Going 1, 2, 3, closed. Honorable Phillips. Okay, Likov.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have one question and a few comments. The question that I have is, what is the availability of the 6,106 megawatt of IPPs at the moment? And then my comments are just on something that the Minister said, that he said that IPPs were security of supply, not to solve load shedding. But if we've got a security of supply, then load shedding will be solved. So I failed to see his reasoning there. And then the comment about Eskom losing market share. The reply there has to be, Eskom can't actually have a market share if they don't have enough product to take to the market. And then buying energy from our neighboring countries. Which neighboring countries? Because we actually sell energy to many of our neighboring countries. So are we going to sell the energy to them and then buy it back? Or are we going to buy energy from other neighboring countries that we don't sell to who produce energy? So if they could maybe just specify the neighboring countries, that would be great. Thank you so much, Chair.
Honorable Lekov.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to first say I do concur with the Honourable Minister that the IRP process does actually conform to the core tenets of the Paris Agreement and the decarbonisation process. But if it is at all possible in future documents, would we be able to quantify what the contribution to that objective is? I mean, if you look at the case of the Powership program, that definitely does not conform or comply with our overall high-level ambitions to decarbonize the economy, even if it is a bridging fuel. So it would just be, I'm not saying let's not do the Powership program ideally, but if we can just, be careful to list whether or not it is something that does comply or doesn't, that would be helpful. The other thing is just with regards to the IPP process. I think there's a little bit that's been said about almost like IPPs might not necessarily be the best vehicle for supplying energy because Eskom would be the preferred vehicle for that. But the reality is that Eskom doesn't have any plans actually to procure new generation capacity within its own stable that will end the present energy crisis. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of the IPPs, if we're going to be looking at bid window 6, it's very important that we have some kind of clarity over what comes after that, because much like you've already referred to, there is no real plan that can guarantee availability of supply that meets the present energy requirements. None of these plans, even the energy crisis plan that was announced by the president, doesn't actually meet the emergency that we face right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I give to the minister, can I request, if, just note, if it happens, because sometimes nature has got its own ways, can I request that Honorable Mahlaule will hold on for me? But if it happened that that meeting has to be finalized, one issue that was raised was that I raised under correspondence is that correspondence that we received from Honorable Zungula. Safe to say that I'm consulting with the chairperson of public enterprise as the lead portfolio committee. That is in relation to the matter raised by the former CEO of Eskom. Honorable Zungula was requesting that a meeting of the three committees, which is the Public Enterprise, Mineral Resources and Energy, as well as the Select Committee, which include Public Enterprise of the NCOP. So that matter is receiving attention. I will consult with the chairperson and see whether the meeting that is requesting can be convened and then make a determination. Can I then, and I'll give to the minister, but as I said, I will also request that Honorable Mahlaule will take the final stage, but I will still log on in the event the department quickly finishes its response. Honorable Minister.
So Honorable Mahlaule will stand in the unlikely event. Now, the team will give answers to a number of these issues. Let me start by just dealing with this thing, energy security of supply and load shedding. The distinction I'm trying to make here is a simple one, that lobbyists for renewables tend to go public and make a point that if we approve contracts for renewables, there will be no load shedding. And that's the point I'm making. I'm saying there will be no load shedding after the lead time of building the capacity to generate that energy. That's why every renewable project is having a lead time of 12, 18 and more months to build the facility. And therefore, if we deal with the emergency now, it is not renewables that are approved that will deal with that particular matter. That's all I'm saying. But in the long term, they will help. But even in the long term, when they contribute to the security of supply, they will have to partner with base load projects so that you have security of supply throughout. I won't get into the details of that. Market share, no product. It's exactly the point I'm making, is that any CEO of an institution like Eskom, any CEO, must be worried about losing market share, and therefore will look after the current generation capacity and fleet that is at his disposal. That CEO must ensure that they operate optimally and retain the market share. So if you don't look after those, that fleet of power stations, you are not going to retain the market share. And therefore you will have no product to sell. Neighboring countries, I'm sure Bella will give the details, but I can tell you that we are importing energy from Cahora Bassa, which is in Mozambique. And during the emergency, they gave us additional 300 megawatts of that. So there are quite a few of the countries, like Zambia, for example, has offered. And all those countries that are offering surplus energy are being looked into. So we're not selling and then buying. Cahora Bassa is always giving us energy, though we export energy to some aspects of Mozambique supply. Contribution of IPPs to reduction of emissions, I'm sure the team can answer that. Power ships not complying. I prefer us not to discuss power ships in a way that is polarized and not coherent, because we're making judgmental calls on it that have not been tested. For example, they don't comply with the reduction of carbon emission. My understanding is that, for example, if you have a fully fledged power station of gas, you cut the emissions by half to the emissions of a coal power station. And that is contributing to lowering the carbon emissions. So these judgmental calls on coal power ships, I think they're just unfortunate and informed more by ideology than technical specificity. So I think let's leave that there. Honorable Chairperson, is it still around? Is it left? Okay, let me leave it. Okay.
Now I hear you, Minister.
No, I was saying on the issues raised by the outgoing CEO of ESCOM, all we need from our side is that he must not throw a stone in the bush. You see, he must say Minister X has said this, Minister Y has asked for a cut, and Minister Z has done this. That's all we want. Because this thing of throwing a stone in the bush and hope that an animal will come out running is actually unscientific. Okay. Mbele?
Thanks, Honorable Minister. I think you've already responded to most of the questions, but maybe just to add, I think that there was a question on the availability of the 6,100 megawatts of renewables. I think without having the numbers here, the simple way of responding to it is that this 6,100 consists of wind and solar. So obviously the solar will be available when the sun is shining, mostly during the day, and hopefully in when it's not cloudy. So we can go back to ESCOM system ops and get a trend. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. The wind will be available when the wind is blowing. On the overall, the solar is available during the day from around 8 a.m. to about 4 or 5 p.m. The wind is generally available in the evening and during peak. If you look at the numbers that ESCOM normally publish on the social media, you'll see that there's generally around 500 to 1,000 megawatts, sometimes even low during peak, because they tend to generally publish peak numbers, which is an indication that this 6,100 megawatts contributes very little during peak because this is not dispatchable. This is not dispatchable power. So hence, I think there's always the argument that renewable energy on their own will not solve the problem. You need to couple renewable energy with other technologies such as gas, or if battery storage is affordable, include battery storage. The question around energy from neighboring countries, I think the minister, you've responded to it. We are importing close to 1,000 megawatts just from Mozambique, from Cahora Bassa. There are discussions, there are a number of projects that have been developed in hydro and gas projects in Mozambique, where the developers have actually approached their department and ESCOM and offered for South Africa to be an off-taker on those projects. And even in other countries as well, like Zambia, there are projects, people who are working on projects that have approached us. The question or the point raised by Honorable Ligolf, I think, Minister, you've responded to the point around the car power ship, but I think the point that I want to emphasize is that net zero does not mean zero emissions. Net zero means that in the overall, you would take other initiatives to take the emissions away. And when one looks at what other countries are talking about, they talk about the planting of trees as other initiatives, the deployment of technologies like the carbon capture storage. So it does not mean that you will stop emitting. So it does not mean you stop deploying fossil fuel related technologies completely. In our case, if you look at the models that we do, the models assume first that the current base, if you take the RP 2019, the assumption of the ESCOM power plants operating at an EAF of 75% has an associated carbon emission levels, which is below what we had committed in terms of the NDCs, in terms of what would have been the emissions from the electricity sector in the medium term. So the fact that we are sitting at EAF of about 50%, it means our emissions are way below what we had said we are going to, we anticipate as emissions. So by adding a little bit of fossil fuel related technology to supplement electricity would not necessarily mean you are actually not complying. So I think that is the context that these things need to be considered under. I think I've responded to all the, and the question, there was a question around what after bid window 6. In the presentation, we had indicated that we are working on battery storage, we are working on gas. The minister has, with the concurrence of the regulator, issued a determination for another 14,000 megawatts of renewable energy and just over 1,200 megawatts of battery storage. So those are the various other bid windows that will come through as we move forward. That's it, Honorable Minister. Back to you. Thank you.
We're reverting back to you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I'm still flexible. I think we have been able to deal with the report, and thank you very much, Honorable Minister, with the report. I think for me, what is good is that it also gives us a background and a better understanding of how the processes that relates to energy supply and energy sustainability unfold, including the issues of the independent power producer processes, which is quite obvious that expecting immediate results could be one of the difficult challenges to have, except if there is a very, very extremely painful, important matter that this house, if there was a house, will collapse if members have not raised that question. Can I open that for 30 seconds? Honorable Lekoff, is it a legacy hand, an old hand?
It is a legacy hand. I do apologize.
That's fine. Going 1, 2, 3. Okay, matter is closed. Honorable Minister, can I give the last words to you?
No, thank you, Chairperson. I think on behalf of the team, we must thank you all. Thank members of the committee for asking these questions. We're learning in these processes all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honor. You know, let me say that I always say you don't have to agree with someone, but it's very important to understand even where you disagree. At times people, they avoid things that they know that they stand to have disagreements. In one life where I used to be, there was a time where somebody was asked a question. Instead of answering the question, because it was a he said, "No, it's not my fault that you don't sit in a particular structure." Now, I think it's important that from time to time, such engagement makes us much better than a duck that goes into the water and come out still clean. It makes us better people in terms of understanding what has to be done and what could be the movement forward. Lastly, on this matter, we place this matter because it's a very serious issue that we are faced with. It's one thing that in every sentence, it will always be high up in the sentence, the question of electricity crisis. And I think we all have at the end of the day to put our hands on the deck, which is why we have been always prepared as a portfolio committee to work and talk to anyone and everyone who seems to be affected, who seems to take cognizance and concern about what we are confronted with. Honorable members, if you agree with me on the first issue that I raised, that's in the event I'm not here, can we agree then that as a chairperson, I will speak to the chairperson of public enterprise with regards to the correspondence received from Honorable Zungula, and then we will revert back to yourself. But I'm of the view that nothing since we've had this committee on the 6th Parliament, nothing will avoid that should not reveal what is the reality, including the matter that the minister is raising. There are quite a number of questions or reasons that will still have to be, in my view, engaged with. Can I then declare the meeting adjourned until further notice? Is there any matter beside that?
No, thank you. Until further notice.
Honorable members, the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.